So good morning, everyone, and a big welcome to all our participants to our panel discussion today. Today, we're going to be talking about how we can multiply innovation with impact, and specifically on how corporate startup partnerships can play a role in that. My name is Daniel. I am from A-Star's Industrial IoT Innovation, or iCube for short. So we are we're in fact a public-private partnership, right? And we operate as an industry consortium, and we actually look at IoT applications for industrial, or rather IoT solutions for industrial applications, mainly also sort of outdoor environment beyond the factory floor, right? So we do work with corporate, large companies, MNCs, LLEs, as well as small, medium enterprises, SMEs, and startups as well. So collaboration and partnership is certainly a big part of what A-Star does as well. So today, I think I'm very happy to be the moderator for this panel discussion. And I think we have three very distinguished panelists joining us today to share with us their thoughts on this topic of corporate startup partnerships, right? I think in this day and age, there's certainly a lot of emphasis around innovation, open innovation, and collaboration. I think as problems become more complex, pace of innovation continues to increase. Certainly more companies or organizations realize that we cannot solve everything on our own, right? And so I think collaboration becomes the key. And I think from the innovation perspective, corporates and startups really represent these two spectrums, and I think they bring in a lot of different, different perspectives, different angles, and we can see how to bring that together. So I think for today, so maybe to start, I'll just do a quick introduction to our three panelists. Maybe I'll just call each one of you, and then you can just give a quick introduction about yourself. So maybe to start, we have Suchi Narayan from SG Innovate. She's the Director for Venture Building and Advanced Manufacturing at SG Innovate. Lots of experience in the commercial sectors as well as the corporate partnership. Suchi, you want to just say a few words to introduce yourself to the participants?
Sure. Thank you, Daniel. Good morning, everyone. Great to be on this panel. So I'm Suchi, and really, been around in the corporate sector for 20 plus years. That's really aging. So I have seen both sides of the equation, and now I'm with SG Innovate. So I'm more focused on venture building, which is the startup side of the equation. So personally passionate about this topic, and I think corporate startup partnerships are so critical. Over the next 2 years, it's been even more critical, and I guess brought to the limelight because of the pandemic, for accelerating digital transformation and acceptance of technology. So very excited to be here, Daniel. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Suchi. Next, we also have John Lim from Meet Ventures. And I think it's his own practice, and he helps corporates and growth stage startups as well to work together. So certainly his perspective will be very, very applicable to this discussion. John, you want to say a few words to the participants?
Yeah, thanks, Daniel, and good morning, everyone. So I'm John, one of the partners at Meet Ventures. Meet Ventures, we are an innovation consultancy firm. We specialize in corporate startup partnerships. So this panel discussion is really quite apt. And our clients currently include like listed companies, government agencies across Japan, Korea, China, and Singapore. We also run a tech startup incubator, so we do work hands-on with tech startups at the early stage, invested in some of them, incubated some of them across Southeast Asia as well.
Great, thank you. And last but certainly not least, we have Ivan Lee, who is the Senior Vice President of Strategy for Prenetics Limited, right, which is a leading genetics and healthcare company from based out of Hong Kong. So Ivan.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Morning, everyone. So my name is Ivan. I am SVP of Strategy in Prenetics. I started my career actually more in, if you will, in the corporate side. So working for a management consulting firm for quite a while, working with kind of big MNCs. Joined Prenetics around kind of 3-4 years ago. And as kind of Daniel mentioned, we're a global leader in genomic and diagnostic testing. We do a range of services from consumer genomic testing, as well as with the pandemic, a lot of different work in COVID-19. And so certainly over the last 2 years, we've been very, very involved with different types of partnership, both in this region as well as our other operating base out of UK. So great to be part of this panel and learning from everyone here.
Great. And I guess Prenetics has been quite successful in terms of growing the business over the last several years from the startup stage until where you are today. So I think we'll be very, very glad to, hope to learn from that experience as well, right?
Sure.
Okay. So I guess let's dive right into the discussion. Maybe just to start and then to get everyone on the sort of the same page. We've mentioned a few times now about this growing sort of interest around collaboration and particular corporate startup partnerships, right? So maybe just to get all perspectives in terms of what do you think is the driver, right, towards this growing interest in terms of the partnerships, and also, I mean, from a corporate startup partnership perspective, are there different forms that these kinds of partnerships can take place in, right? Anyone particular wants to volunteer to start? Or maybe Suchi, you'd like to start?
Sure, happy to, Daniel.
My screen.
Happy to. I mean, I think when you look at tech, so I guess let me take that back. When you look at the way to solve problem, technology seems to be a standard word that everybody thinks solves for problems. But building out a cool tech is quite painful and it's expensive. So anytime you're building out a technology, it's got to be outcome-based, which means it's got to be customer value creation. So working back from customer value creation, the customer is the corporate typically. And without this kind of partnership, the coolest of technology is not going to succeed. So if we got to build out the tech and then we have to apply the tech. So there are two sides of, I guess, to me, a bridge, and both need to work and communicate effectively in order for, us to push forward with whatever problem we're trying to solve. And also, like I alluded to in my introduction, with the economy slowing down, the impact of globalization on supply chains, localization of supply chains coming in, manufacturing, particularly with the unstable economy globally, there's a lot of focus on localization of manufacturing as well. In which case, really companies, SMEs upwards, right, all the way to large enterprise in the various countries are starting to look at what can I do to be more innovative, to be more creative, to have that startup engagement, because they don't have necessarily an innovation culture. While we think all corporates are innovative, they're not, right? And so they're looking to build that culture or to buy it. Two things. So to go back to the second part of your question, where you said, what are the various forms of startup partnerships? It's interesting because corporates need to sort of appreciate the deep involvement with the startup. It could be, it could take the form of venture building, for example, which is what I do, where you're looking at spinning off bits and pieces of the corporate business as its own entity. Right? It could be a standalone business coming from a corporate. It could be a CVC, in which case, you're looking for growth opportunities for your own company. And also maybe you're looking at creating new business units, right, for generation of revenue. It could be something about external partnerships. I'm looking to see how can I partner to make sure that my customers have a better value proposition coming from me. And the fourth bit could be also exploring adjacencies, right? Because if you look at, a company like an Amazon, for example, started off as a bookseller, right? And today it's much more known for its cloud-based tech services. Right. So really it's about, if I'm looking at adjacencies, maybe I don't have the build capability in-house, partnering with the new technologies would open up a lot of doors to those adjacencies. So that's sort of how I think about the forms of partnership.
Right. So you're saying that the startups actually provide a lot of technology, and then the corporates provide sort of that demand, right? And then this is how you can bring it together, right? Great, thanks. John, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think recently I came across a report from INSEAD, and they conducted a study on the Forbes Global 500 companies. And in the report, what struck me is that actually 68% of the top 100 companies from Forbes Global 500 are actually engaging with startups. So that's quite a huge number. And I think this number is only going to increase further. And the reason being because there are tangible outcomes from many of these corporate startup partnerships. I'm sure later on, the other members of the panel, they'll also be sharing their experiences and some of the case studies that they've gone through. But from what I see, there are actually a few common ways in which corporates have been engaging with startups. Like what Suchi mentioned, definitely venture building, corporate venture capital investing in the startups. There could be open innovation programs, corporate accelerators. These are all some ways in which corporates and startups can partner together. Across the years, I think there have been preferences for different types of engagement. So far, one of the most common types is still direct investments made by corporates into the startups. And if I'm not wrong, I think more than 60% of the unicorns in US actually have at least one corporate investor. So I think that's one of the very prominent statistics. But I think in Southeast Asia, there are also other ways in which corporates and startups have been working together, such as open innovation programs, which I think even the Singapore government has been very strongly behind. We have our own open innovation platform where corporates can post problem statements and get startups to apply and try to solve some of these problems for the corporates. So I guess it's one reason could be definitely also apart from the fact that there are tangible outcomes from this, but it also the push from government sector, like in Singapore, starting off opening innovation platforms and things like that, and also greater interest from the startups themselves. I think when the startups see news of partnerships between corporates and startups, it gets the newer startups interested and to also apply and try to find ways to work with some of these corporates. Yeah, and I think one last point for me is in terms of the exit strategy of startups. In Southeast Asia, most of the exits actually come in the form of acquisitions from corporates. And that's also one reason probably why startups are eager to engage with corporates at an early stage, because you never know, they could be the ones who end up acquiring you.
Right. I see. Great. Yeah. How about Ivan? I mean, from your experience, both, inside and outside of a startup, what do you see in this case?
Yeah, no. So I think I echo a lot of points that a lot of the panelists have shared, really, which is there's sort of a natural fit, and maybe you can go into culture and say maybe there's cultural differences, but actually, in terms of what each party may want and need at a moment in time, there's sort of this natural fit, and hence maybe from what John shared, that the numbers are actually proving this case where increasingly partner corporates and startups look for partnership, right? And I think even in my kind of a vantage point, right, I think we see the fit very clearly, where we may work with corporates that either bring in maybe some form of initial capital, this kind of more earlier stage of our journey, but very often an access to a customer, whether they themselves are the customer or they themselves create a new way for us to share a product. But equally, they need that growth and they need that new ways of either engaging their customer base or a new kind of press releases, pieces that they want to start talking about from an investor standpoint. And those are often things that I think startups can bring back, which is, okay, here are new ways of solving problems, here are new things that you can bring to your customer. And so I think through our journey, we actually had the opportunity to explore these things in different businesses throughout.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's good. So I guess we hear a lot about, certainly what both the corporates and the startups can get out of such partnerships, right? But if we stick it, are usually, how often do these benefits really kind of show itself? Are they often realized? Actually, I think I read somewhere also that for startups that engage in these kinds of partnerships, probably only a quarter of them are sort of satisfied in terms of the partnerships itself, right? So why do you think that is? And sort of what are some of the issues do you think will arise, right, from these kinds of partnerships? I don't know, Ivan, you want to start on that side?
I think I'll give it a go, right? And I think I'm also not surprised by that effect, right? While a lot of different kind of partnerships being formed, some of them may not fully mature and realize maybe their intention, right? And I think, and I would say, and even in our own journey, right, where there are some partnerships that work really well and some partnerships that we need to rethink. And I would kind of bring it back down to probably what were the original intentions in the first place, and equally how thought out was the initial intention. And sometimes I think, from an entrepreneur perspective, you need to take, hypothesis and certain beliefs of what things will work out. So you're always going to make certain bets and risk. But coming back is, does the proposition actually work? And maybe back to one of the points that Suchi made was, does it actually create great consumer value in terms of the shared partnership? And I think that's typically maybe one area where great partnerships actually have that lined up really well, and it became it was a very good thing to start. And I think the other bit probably I would share is maybe around the commitment side of both parties, and whether that is equally still the top priority for both parties. Because I think in business, you make it work if it's a really great idea, but equally if it's not such a great idea, then you see people start to deviate along that journey. And so I think a lot in the relationships that worked for us, I think it was always a really good something that made sense for both parties, and that our initial hypotheses were true. But it's something you find out, I think, along that journey.
Along the way, right? Yeah.
And I'd love to hear also kind of other thoughts around that.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. I mean, I think, John, you work with a lot of the corporate side. I mean, and I know you definitely want to make these kinds of partnerships work. How do you help the corporates, right, identify sort of maybe the right startups to work with to make sure these things work out, positively?
Yeah, I think I echo what Ivan said. Definitely one of the most important criteria for startup corporate partnership success is understanding what they want in the first place, going into the partnership with an end in mind. And only if the startups and the corporates have this clarity in terms of their objectives, can they come up with an action plan, come up with a strategy to make it work. Apart from that, I think a commitment is also very important. Commitment, especially from the part of the corporates, as well as the startups, of course, but more so the corporates, in terms of the time, in terms of the people that they assign to oversee this partnership. Usually we find that corporates that allocate at least or assign at least one of their senior executives to be in the partnerships team, usually there's a little more success. I guess it's probably because the senior executives or senior management, being part of the partnership team, they know what's happening. They tend to be able to also push things forward, and so overcome some of the red tape and hierarchy issues within the corporate structure itself.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess these are probably two of the key things.
Okay, great. And then Suchi, maybe with all the startups that you work with, right? I mean, how do you see this coming along? And I mean, John mentioned having senior executives from the corporates. Is that do you think that's a good way, or is there sort of that kind of fear as well that there will be a loss of autonomy from the startup side once the corporates get too involved? I mean, what do you see?
It's interesting, right, Daniel, because I completely resonate with where Ivan and John are coming from. But so let's separate the issues. There are two separate things that could be potentially challenging. One is the strategy perspective, which Ivan was speaking about in terms of customer value, making sure there's alignment and all of that. So I won't focus on that because my points resonate very much with the other two panelists. But the second piece is more the operational or the tactical piece as well. And we see a lot of challenges there. One would be, the most common one, I think, is expectation alignment, right? When you're working with a startup, you're not going to get 99.999% uptime. And I think that the corporates need to understand that. The second is, from the startup corporate perspective, time is something really that both sides need to appreciate and understand, because corporates run on a different schedule to the startup, and startups are very lean. So they might not be able to, address something that's customizable to a corporate within a certain time frame and so on. The third, which again is a massive stumbling block in my opinion, is these procurement processes. I mean, corporate procurement is insane. It's 60 pages of something that a startup, it's not even worth spending time filling it out sometimes, right? So the procurement process, they've got to have a different process, a one-page procurement if it's a startup. If you're less than 20 million in revenue, fill out a one-pager. If you're greater than 20, I don't know, I'm just picking an arbitrary number, but something of that sort, which reduces the challenge for the startups. And finally, I'd say my fourth one would be pet peeve is professional service standards. You're not going to, you can't expect the same standards of professional service delivery from a startup as you would from a corporate. If they could deliver that level of professional services, they would be you, they would be a corporate. Yeah. So I think there needs to be an understanding on both sides, and expectations need to match at the operational level as well.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I guess that's the key. I think to me then it's that that expectations need to be aligned. Right. I think because if the corporates expect certain things and then startups not able to really deliver it up to that kind of expectations, and maybe the other way works is true as well. I mean, in terms of what these startups expect from the corporates, that the support to that they want to receive from the corporates, and what the corporates are able to provide as well, right? Good. So in terms of these kinds of partnerships, and I mean, I guess some of this has been touched on already, but I mean, how do you what would, I mean, we talk about expectations as well. So what would be a good measure of success, right? In the way that the people that both startups and corporates can expect out of these kinds of partnerships, and in the way, what would be kind of sort of reasonable expectations to look at it in terms of success, and how do you measure it, right? And to say that you have achieved sort of what you wanted out of this partnership. Yeah, and anyone wants to give that a go?
I can maybe
yeah,
I can
sure.
So I think, and I will go back into maybe a bit of the point that I was mentioning, which is getting the initial objective or the strategy right. And very often in doing that exercise helps you better understand how you should even measure success in the beginning, right? And so kind of coming back, it's like, am I partnering with this corporate because I want to gain, better an access to a customer base, and then I would probably look at it as, what's my 6-month, 12-month type, revenue or even a profit case. But equally, I think at startups, you also look at potential relationships where it may not be about the initial kind of immediate financial success, but rather maybe proving out an idea that you have, and you hope to bring that idea to other cases. And so equally, then it's what's maybe my customer feedback with this corporate. And the other big piece, and I think often we approach some of our partnerships this way, would be also what type of equally credibility does this corporate actually help you kind of gain, right? And that may be as a young, and this is earlier stages, right? As a younger startup where people may not know you, but they will know the MNC. Are you partnering with the right MNC? Are you creating the right amount of press coverage that you want? But I think it comes back to what were your initial objectives, and then how do you actually just define the right metric to get a feel for, is this the right thing for you? And of course, things can change along the way. Yeah.
Okay.
Ivan, I love the point you made, because I think getting that strategy right is so important. And I wonder whether early stage startups really think through that bit, because that seems to be such an important point to consider. They're more scrambling around and scrambling to get a paid POC. They're scrambling to get TRL readiness, and it's maybe the piece of advice to take away is to take a step back and spend time figuring out that strategy of what do you really want in the short term, long term from this partnership. For the startup, I mean, because there's more at stake, I think, for a startup. They could potentially burn out delivering a single POC to the customer. Yeah, just wanted to throw that in there.
Sure. Yeah. John, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think for us, because we are on the ground helping to facilitate such partnerships, usually the first thing we do for both corporates and startups is to get them to write down their objectives and their goals. Next thing we do is that we break it down into 6 months, 12 months, and then 2 years, 5 years,
Okay.
so that they have a better clarity of what's their long-term objectives, mid-term, and also in a sense to align their expectations. Like what Suchi mentioned, expectation management is very critical. So
Yeah.
there are some objectives that might take them a bit longer to achieve. Some could be achieved in a shorter time frame, maybe 6 months to 1 year. So this exercise helps to get everyone on the same page. And I guess that is one of the key things that we do. As to the measure of success for such partnerships, I think it really depends on whether they meet these objectives, right? Like at the 6 months mark, at the 12-month mark, at the 18-month mark. Every 6 months we do a review and we help them to see, whether they are on track to achieving those objectives.
Okay. Good. Yeah. So again, I guess planning ahead right from the beginning, making sure you know what you want, I think is key in terms of the success for these kinds of partnerships, right? From a corporate perspective, I guess there's also going to be that question of when does it make sense to partner versus building your own capability internally. Maybe John, you can chip in on that. When do you think it makes sense, right? Or maybe what kind of areas do you think it makes sense for the corporates to look at partnerships?
I think from my perspective, I think there's probably two key things that corporates usually look at before they decide whether to do it themselves or to work with other startups or work with other third parties. I think the first is strategic alignment. How important is that objective to their overall company strategic goal? And if let's say it's something that is complementary to their core product or their core offering, or something that's a very adjacent to it, then I guess that is a strong factor for them to maybe consider doing it themselves. And the second thing is the time to market. How fast do they need it out? If they are able to afford maybe about 1 to 2 years, probably they can consider even building it themselves. But if let's say it's something that they want to just, it's not that important and they want to just get it out quick, it's just meeting a pain point, but maybe it's not that major, not something that will affect their entire core capabilities, and maybe they might choose to partner with a startup. So I guess these are probably two factors that you'll consider.
I see. Yeah. And Suchi, what do you think in this regard?
I'll give you the analyst answer. I don't think it's a clean, straightforward answer. The answer is really it depends.
Yeah.
And if to echo much of what John said, it really depends on how core the technology is to the corporate. If you're a windmill company and you're looking at a new technology for wind turbines, I would keep that IP in-house. I would probably set up a venture building team. I would because there's a lot at stake, firstly, because it's core technology. But more importantly, you need access to senior management. You need access to new product development. You need access to figure out, is it going to integrate with existing systems? What is the cost of production? Can it fit in with the different bits and pieces, which I'll recycle from a different product and so on? In which case, of course, it makes sense to be in-house. Of course, if it's adjacent areas, it makes sense to explore a potential partnership, collaboration, acquisition even of a startup or a POC. But in the situations, I suppose, really simplistically, if the startups solve existing problem for you, let's say it's an RPA solution, makes absolute sense to get a POC, put a contract in place, and just outsource the thing. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And Ivan, from your experience, do you any particular areas that you've worked in corporate where it makes sense?
Yeah, I think what all the points Sher made I think I resonate a lot too. I think that's been a lot of our experiences where a lot of the partnerships that kind of made a lot of sense were cases where we were offering something that was an addition to their overall portfolio, but not core kind of capabilities or skill set that they should try built in the first place.
Yeah.
And so I think that's often where it kind of makes more sense of a corporate. I think the other piece that I might also share, and I've seen this where is also a way for corporate to not only around time to market, but also for them to hedge their bets. So try it out with a startup, see if it makes sense before they think more about whether they should build it themselves or buy it themselves. It's almost like a rent-ish model at times.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, again, where kind of both sides get something that they both want and make for something good.
Good. Yeah. And I mean, maybe Sushi, for SG Innovate, you sort of also act as an accelerator, right? I mean, for these startups to kind of grow. I mean, so but in terms of an external accelerator, right? I mean, what role do you see that kind of in this, you know, kind of fostering these kinds of collaborations and partnerships, and you know, and is it a key role, or do you think corporates can do it themselves, or you know, maybe engage people like John from Meet Ventures, right? Yeah.
So to take a step back with SG Innovate, it's about a 4 to 5 year journey for us so far. And we invest in early stage startups, so seed to about Series A. So you can imagine that companies we invested in 4 years ago have been growing, right? And they've gone to Series A and beyond as of today. And the needs have been consistently changing. So our portfolio's needs are evolving with us, right? We're growing with the portfolio. And we do find a big need to bridge that platform, or create a platform between the corporates and the startup. We don't necessarily provide acceleration programs, but we certainly do have now an active corporate engagement team in place. So when we say corporate engagement team, we are trying to bring together the supply side and the demand side, and you know, to put them together in a seamless way to make sure that there is value. So we don't just throw 10 startups at a corporate. We will make sure we curate it, we understand your issues, we understand what you're looking for. And you know what, if we don't have it, we'll tell you we don't have it. If we have it, we'll tell you, look, these are the 6 startups that sound like they can address something you want to do, but you probably need NDAs to discuss this further. So we're trying to actively do that, because we do find a need to do that. Very often when you go into a startup page or a web page, they provide a solution in a specific industry, at least the startups we work with, because they're very early stage. So they typically don't scale across multi-industry. But you'd be surprised how many of these applications could have a multi-industry, you know, use case. We simply haven't thought about it. We simply haven't, you know, explored it. So when the corporate looks at that solution, they'll be thinking, oh my goodness, you're in XYZ, but I find the same issues in oil and gas. And one good example was a medtech startup, which is looking at fluid dynamics for the flow of blood through the veins, right? If you think about it, oil and gas rigs, pressured pipeline, flowing through a very structured pipeline, and again, fluid dynamics, it's very, very essential. So if you look at AI, which is trained on blood, there is also the AI which can be trained on oil. So there's a lot of synergy there. But can you imagine an oil and gas CEO going to the website of a medtech company and saying, "Hey, this sounds interesting"? Probably never going to happen.
Right.
So I think it is about drilling down into what is the root strength of the startup. What are they capable of achieving? What is the outcome they create? What is the problem they solve? And then doing the same for the customer, saying, you're saying X, but really, what is your problem statement? And making a match between the two.
Right. So it's maybe this leads me to just maybe a more general question related to that. Is that how can, you know, the corporates look for the startups, right, that they think would be good for them to partner with, and likewise from the startup's perspective. Well, maybe from the startup perspective, they can see sort of what are the big corporates that make sense, but how do they take that step to, how do they connect, right? I mean, if they do cold calls, and, you know, that's not going to work, right? So, yeah, I know, John, I mean, would you like to share maybe how can they start looking for the right partners?
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. So, I think there are 2 parts to this question. One is from the corporate's perspective, and the other is the startup's perspective. So I'll probably start from the corporate's perspective. I think from the corporate perspective, the first thing to ask is what kind of partnership are they trying to achieve, right? If all they are looking for is one or two startups to work with, maybe, for example, an accelerator program might not be so suitable. But if they have like a standard proposition and they're looking for many different startups to come in, then maybe an accelerator might be a good mouthpiece to promote this standard offering out and try to attract as many startups to apply as possible, and from there they do the best. Then from the startup's perspective, I guess there are two key things that they need to look for in a corporate. One is willingness, and the second is ability. So what's willingness and ability? Ability refers to whether the corporate has what the startup needs. So if the startup is looking for a certain technology, intellectual property, and the corporate has it, then maybe it might make sense to partner with them. Or if, let's say, the corporate has access to certain markets that the startup is trying to expand into, then maybe it makes sense. And willingness refers to the commitment of time, energy, resources from the corporate. Not every corporate is willing, and even if they are willing, there are different levels of willingness. So the best corporates, they exhibit a strong level of willingness to work with the startups. And if startup is able to find a corporate that exhibits, strong willingness and has the ability and is willing to, share that resources with the startup, I think they've got it fine.
Okay, yeah. Ivan, what do you think?
I think I'm not going to claim that we know the kind of magic formula, right? But I think and the joke being that obviously having great CEO and having great management team helps. But if I look back into I think our own experiences and how did we get to meet some of these corporates that we worked well with, and I think that is really the range of stuff that I think as an entrepreneur you explore. One tranche that I think certainly was quite helpful was actually our investors. And whether it's our initial investor linking us up with even their base or some of their other investments that are in different space. And the other bit is actually leveraging off of many of our initial partnerships, where you might have actually worked with a, if you will, a smaller corporate, but the smaller corporate end up, having access to other corporates that they also partner with in other relationships. And so looking at that kind of overall problem as more of a journey on how do you go from one step to another, as opposed to I'm going to call up the most senior person in the biggest company in the world. And I think that's typically the range that we've explored. And then obviously I think it's the, again, coming back, it's the skill set of the entrepreneur, which is how do you think constantly strategically about what you can offer to, if you will, the world or problems that are outside. I think similar to what Suchi mentioned, then it's how do I as an entrepreneur think about what I build, and are there other people that would actually desire what I want, and it might actually solve a very pressing problem for them. And I think very often those were cases where we found things that tracked.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, it looks like our time is running out, but maybe can we end in sort of some positive note, if any success stories that from each one of you that you can share, just to in a way encourage and inspire our participants, whether it's startups or corporates here, to start engaging in these kinds of partnerships, right? Suchi, you want to share any success stories that you may have gone through?
We have a lot of them, but I don't know what I can share on this platform. But I will say that if you build the technology, at the risk of sounding general, if you build a technology with a customer use case, so keep the customer close to heart. I think it's about solving a customer value proposition. Always go back, validate with the customers. And to Ivan's point, reach out to your venture capital investors, reach out to your private equity investors, reach out to your board. These are people who can connect you to corporates, and the warm connections are way better than any cold call ever will be, because they're willing to give you, at least listen to your pitch, right? So I'd say out of our portfolio companies for SG Innovate, almost 70-80% of them managed to get at least a POC with someone that they ended up getting a contract with eventually. So it is tough. The first POC is always difficult, but once that happens, and once you learn and you stumble and you figure it out, and you deliver what the corporate wants, and never just deliver, always wow the customer. And once you wow the customer, opportunities definitely do flow in. So hang in there. That's my advice to the startups. You guys are doing a great job. Hang in there.
I don't know, John, any success you can share? I don't know, looks like we're out of time, but maybe we can extend a little bit.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think probably maybe I'll share one recent example. So we have been running an corporate accelerator program for a listed company in Japan. And their value proposition to the startups is that they are offering the startups their proprietary technology, market access into Japan, as well as some cash grants. In return, they are asking for some royalties from the startups of the products that utilize their technology. So it's a very win-win kind of partnership proposition. And so far, I think the good thing is that one startup has received about $500,000 in investment, and another startup has already started and delivered the product. So I guess we do see successful case studies coming out, real life examples coming out, and I think she mentioned, I think one of the key things that allows for the success stories to happen is really the commitment and the commitment of the C-suite from both the corporates as well as the startup.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Ivan, any last sharing you want to?
Yeah, I think rather than staying on examples, I think it's if I reflect on the entire journey, I think it's this aspect of enjoying the journey and letting your initial success invite other kind of bigger or more exciting cases, and thinking about how do you continuously build down a certain path or explore different aspects rather than trying to focus on one success definition, right? Because I think even in our own journey, we've explored all the ranges of partnerships. Some could be very small, some could be very niche, but we've often seen these niche partnerships allowed us to talk to, more mid-sized partnerships, and that gave more comfort to the bigger size partnership, and it's sort of a journey that we very much quite enjoyed. And then it's part of the fun.
Okay, so enjoy the journey. First step's really hard, get over it, and things will get better, right? So maybe with that, I think thank you so much to all our panelists, Suchi, John, and Ivan. Certainly enjoyed the discussion. Hopefully it was useful and insightful for all participants as well. And go out there and start, partnering up, and hopefully we can make more impact in terms of innovation. Thank you, everyone.